Michele, I'm going to start off with, I think, what's probably a bit of an unfair question, because it's a really big question, but I'm hoping that this question might set the scene for the rest of this session. And we were really wanting to get your thoughts on what you think are the biggest issues facing working women today.
Thanks, Julia, and hi, everybody. Great to see you all, and thanks very much for the invitation to do this, Nicole. And I, of course, also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay all my respects to elders past and present, always was, and it always will be Aboriginal land. And look, that's an easy question to start with, Julia. Thanks for that. I think the biggest issues, I would say, are the gender pay gap and the retirement income gap. So the fact that if you count all hours worked, the gender pay gap is still over 30%. If you look at full-time hours, it's over 14%. And of course, we know, you would know better than I, working in the sector, the retirement gap in terms of women retiring today with less than half the super men have. I'd add to that insecure work is a critical issue for women, all workers, but for women workers in particular, because it's more likely to be women that are in casual, insecure, unreliable jobs, and a whole lot of the issues that flow from that in terms of people's income, and that I just spoke. I think somebody might need to go on mute there, right? Flow from the fact that it's really, we need to address insecure work to address issues to do with gender and pay equity as well. The other things I'd add is access to working arrangements that suit our lives. And with women still doing the majority of caring, whether that's for kids or for elderly parents or for people with disabilities, having working arrangements that aren't the employer's view of flexibility, but are genuinely meeting the requirements that so many of us have in our life to care for others, and valuing that and having work that works with that. I'd add to that, of course, access to free universal childcare, because that's one of the huge things that impacts on women's participation at work. We're pretty poor, if you look internationally, about what's happening in Australia. Our rate of women participating comparative to other countries is actually quite low. And we think childcare, early childhood education and care, good quality, free universal care is critical to that. And the last two things I'd add is about violence and harassment. So both dealing with violence and harassment in the workplace, and making sure that we have effective both rights but also consequences for employers that don't act to keep workers safe in every way, and to keep women safe as well as all other workers. And secondly, ways of supporting workers who are dealing with family and domestic violence, and having paid leave for family and domestic violence circumstances is really critical to saving lives and to giving people a chance to deal with some of the worst situations in their lives. So they're the sort of big things I'd start off with, Julia. I'm sure there's others as well, but I might leave it there.
Yeah, and Michele, I think you've really covered a broad range, haven't you? I mean, the gender pay gap is so important to us in our sector. We often take the prize, sadly, for having the highest gender pay gap in the finance sector, and it's caused by lots of different contributing factors, and discretionary pay models. We think is a leading factor of that. It's something that we've got a very close eye on across industry super, in making sure that our pay models remain fair, transparent, because we're concerned about the kind of retail creep that we see across industry super. And I think that, the introduction of incentives and other types of bonuses, and just a discretionary pay model generally, of course, doesn't help the gender pay gap. Just picking up on your comments, though, about the disproportionate women have around unpaid caring responsibilities. And I think whilst many of our audience members today, our members are locked down in Melbourne, we saw that in those first lockdowns, that it was women who picked up the extra burden of unpaid responsibility whilst they maintained work, looked after children, did the homeschooling. I think what it did throughout the COVID period is just bring to everybody's attention again, quite starkly, how much what we need to really do to think about the kinds of ways to address that particular problem, because that, of course, then goes back to the super gap that you mentioned. Women who take on the lion's share of unpaid work to look after children or elderly members of their families, we know that is one of the factors that leads to broken periods of paid employment, for example, and the super gap. So I think you've covered all the things that really the FSU are thinking and working actively in those particular areas.